Greetings and welcome back one final time as I cannot take you any further after this chapter, and we're also up against the calendar as well. We're heading into, I've indicated earlier, probably my favorite chapter in a course that I love. So my antennas are as I said too, also that my antennas are going to be up. And this chapter is the regional concept. It's not in your textbook. If you're going to look for it, you're not going to find it. But I have certainly kept it grafted into the course. So as we saw in chapter one, geographers ask the questions, that focus on geography of location and place. And so we looked at how things are distributed back in that chapter on the surfaces over the earth. And then we looked at specifically how physical and cultural elements are the same or different from place to place, how these diverse differences between places originated, where they came from, and what all these differences and similarities mean for all of us. So in this chapter here, we are going to take a look at and explain the importance of region in the study of geography. We're going to distinguish between formal and functional regions and understand the methods and procedures involved in applying the criteria to the formation of the region. I should probably expand the font here for you guys. There we go. Of course, some of the major terms here: region. The regions are, spatial extents, patterns of sameness. Formal regions are regions that are dubbed such because of perhaps something that's static, a law, um, maybe a climate pattern, or an economic, well, not an economic pattern, but the climate patterns and things just are not going to change. Language, language patterns. Functional regions would be an economic it would be an economic zone. That can change, probably won't, but it could. And then the regional concept, right? The regional concept, the um, overarching um, criteria behind a region and how that is um, dubbed and constructed. So again, one of my favorite concepts of the entire course, the actual criteria of it. Let's take a look at this particular section here. And some of them, I guess we could probably stop and think about some of the right here in North America, and predominantly in the United States, some of the major belts and regions that we have here. You have the Rust Belt, right? The Sun Belt extending from Florida all the way over in Southern California. The Bible Belt, which will be part of your reading this week, the criteria behind that. The Corn Belt, I will talk about that here in this lecture. The criteria behind that. Then you have like Silicon Valley, a functional region. Appalachia, more of an economic region, functional region that could change, like Silicon Valley could. The Iron Range in Minnesota, and the Megalopolis, right? Megalopolis ranging from Boston down to used to be Washington, D.C. I would strongly argue Richmond, Virginia, the capital of Virginia, about 100 miles south of D.C. Now, the regional concept Geography is the study of similarities and differences from place to place, as well as the study of spatial differentiation, both of which help explain the enduring centrality of regional geography. And in regions, as we've talked about several times before, there's spatial summaries that kind of an aerial equivalent, as I see here, of the historian's epochs or periods. Or another way to just kind of flip it around, where the historian starts with epochs and periods for their study to springboard off of that. For geographers, it is it's the region, and it's a device of aerial generalization. And the regional concept is a set of classification principles, convictions, and techniques geographers use and employ to define and analyze these regional entities. So your first set of notes here, and I'm thinking about that um, citation there back to page one. You could check that out, but I'm not sure if I forgot to change that. I'm not sure if that's accurate. So for the geographer, a region is an attempt to organize all of these interrelated parts that make up the Earth's mosaic, if you will, of diversity on its surface. And the region does this by becoming an aerial generalization. So the geographer classifies as a result, in regional terms, and they bring regional concepts that are based on characteristics of a place through this aerial generalization. Again, just setting up the next section here, as many individual regions may exist, uh, as there are spatially organized physical and cultural phenomenon to investigate and generalize. And as I say here too, despite their potential number and all the diversity, all the regions are just basically spatial summaries that share a few common characteristics. So for all of them, you have your absolute and relative location, right? We saw that earlier chapters that are important. All have spatial extent, and their boundaries are they're defined by, I'm trying to think of the right word for that. They're the aerial spread, right? The aerial spread of the feature or a set of features selected for a geographer's uh, particular study. Looking at we've got some fill in the blanks here. All right, fill in the blanks. Regions are hierarchically arranged. They're hierarchically arranged, each defining only a portion of spatial reality. I wanted to show you, since you don't have the textbook for this, I wanted to bring in some few pictures. And this is that example here of a spatial hierarchy. And I always thought this was a great visual example of this spatial hierarchy. And this is the Delmarva Peninsula. The Delmarva Peninsula, you got Delaware, Maryland, Eastern Shore, and Virginia. And if you take a look at that, this is one possible, as I say, nesting of regions with a regional hierarchy defined by differing criteria. Each regional unit has some kind of internal coherence, and the recognition of its constituent parts adds to and aids in understanding the composite aerial unit that is there. hierarchy of regions, the Delmarva Peninsula. Regions have locations, right? We talked about this earlier on in the course that, you know, really you have to start there. You have to start with your geographic study, perhaps with location. So regions have locations, and tags like the Midwest highlight the importance of relative location. Right? We're not talking about exact coordinates on the map. It's how areas and regions relate to other regions. They have spatial extent. They have spatial extent. Let me get my lecture model back up here. They have spatial extent. One can make a constant generalization about culture and environment of a group of, again, adjacent territories, the relative location, the aspect of that. They have boundaries. They have boundaries. They are based on certain features. Their limits are determined when those features are no longer dominant. Regionalization is how a geographer classifies a region, and it's based on established criteria. So basically a frame of reference. It's a frame of reference, but the frame of the reference must have limits. Must have limits, and those limits are open to debate. For example, the Midwest. The Midwest consists of certain states that are generally agreed upon by geographers: Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, and Missouri. Some geographers will include Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania, from on a line pretty much from maybe the eastern end of Erie County on down to West Virginia. And in fact, West Virginia, parts of the northwestern sections of the state down through, the western border are dubbed as the Midwest by some geographers, not most. And I would say this about both of those states too, where um, some geographers are including segments of it. This is in a cultural sense that they're looking at, those pieces of the state as the Midwest. The Midwest too, kind of carrying on with this theme here of criteria. The Midwest can also include the Dakotas, Nebraska, and Kansas, depending on what the criteria is. Now, I know earlier on in the course I'd given you guys a map and we were regionalizing. We kind of played around with this to an extent. And those states I just mentioned, the Dakotas, Nebraska, and Kansas, they are often separated into what we call the plain states as well. Big picture here, the region is based on properties that one considers important. For example, flatlands and fields. Is it agrarian? Is it blue collar? What are the population patterns? Regions have area. The Bay Area slash Oakland, or no, I wouldn't say slash, in parentheses, Oakland and San Francisco, California. The Corn Belt, the Corn Belt. These, et cetera, et cetera. These regions have limits. And you have them all over the world. You have in Canada, Ontario, Quebec. You have the Clay Belt, um, and there are others, around the globe. The Corn Belt, for example, the Corn Belt. If you're traveling northward from Kentucky into into Illinois, in Illinois, the difference you're going to see is in the matter of degree of corn. Okay, you're still, you're still within the corn belt. In other words, what you're going to notice the increasing amount of cornfields. And since not all of the farmland in the corn belt is under corn, the difference is would be one, just a matter of degree. In establishing the criteria. But the criteria must be established. For example, 50% of all land must be cultivated for corn in order for it to be considered, a corn belt. Now, it's possible with criteria to increase the number of your, of your criteria so that more than one condition must be satisfied before the region is delimited. So the overriding characteristic of a region's contents may be, probably will be, its homogeneity. We've talked about that several times, or its sameness, or its sameness. Lastly, I want to head into formal and functional regions. And again, we've dwelt on that in the past, but I want to elaborate on it a little deeper and just briefly set this up by saying that regions may be formal or functional. Formal regions are areas of essential uniformity throughout their extent in one or a limited combination of static, physical, or cultural features. Whereas, you know, whatever is observable about those features in one part of the region is generally going to hold true for, the rest of its parts. So let's look at the notes. Formal regions are uniform in physical or cultural features. Could be determined by climate, for example, a humid subtropical zone, or a cultural homogeneity, for example, similar language, religion, ethnicity, or some kind of law, some kind of custom. And its boundaries are determined over where a valid generalization can be made of those common attributes, a little bit like what I talked about with the Corn Belt. But the regions are not so definable, however. Often, and this sounds like a good quiz question here, often it's the subjective decision of the geographer. The boundary may hinge on a stated amount of precipitation, um, certain soil characteristics, or the dominance of certain plant associations. And I am thinking back to chapter one. I think it's figure 114 might help you internalize this. There's a couple visuals in that section. Here's the big picture, though, about the formal region, because I do know I'm going to include this on what you're going to need to know uh, about chapter 14. You're going to have to differentiate between the formal and functional region. And we've dwelt on this. The formal region can be viewed as static. It's kind of word I like for this: static, uniform, immobile. It's immobile. Natural regions such as the Rocky Mountains or the Mississippi Delta, right? Some kind of physical landscape. Quebec, French-speaking Quebec province in Canada, and again the Corn Belt. These are uniform cultural and agricultural regions. Are probably not going to change. And lastly, the functional region. the functional region. Functional region is dynamic and organizational in in nature, defined by interactions and exchanges. Its boundaries are contingent upon the recognition and maintenance of the dynamic interactions that define it. And we know that some towns are not what they once were. Some towns are burgeoning because of various economic activities, and changes the complexion of a particular region. So the functional regions are defined as a spatial system defined by interaction and connections that give it a changing, uh, organized basis. So as long as the exchanges are not altered, the boundaries are going to remain the same. The boundaries will remain the same. And on page 12, back in chapter 1, there's a inset map. I remember you might want to turn to that too. You get, if you need to, the Silicon Valley, right? Silicon Valley, which continues to grow. Functional region, unlike the static formal region, is dynamic. It's dynamic. It's active. It's continuously shaped by forces that modify it, and they're centered on an urban core. They're centered on an urban core, some kind of a node or a focus of regional interaction. So whether it's formal or functional, regions are creations. Again, looks like a good quiz question here. They're creations of the intellect, right? The human intellect, forming the framework for the organization of spatial data. And that is a wrap on chapter 14. And for all intents and purposes, the course as far as the traditional information, the dispensing of information goes, right? Let's look at what's up ahead. And some very, very important things coming up here. As you know, got a reading. It's a short one. It's criteria for the Bible Belt. Okay, criteria for the Bible Belt. So just adding another layer in your knowledge bank of what's entailed in dubbing regions, right? It's all about criteria. Wednesday, I'm going to give you guys a reading guide. I'm going to give you a reading guide, and basically, since you don't have a textbook, you're just basically going to use your lecture models for the reading guide. Should be pretty easy. Thursday, you got an interesting lab. I always say that because they are interesting labs. You're going to be looking at one of these deals here. You've got you're going to search for businesses that use regional terms such as names like Hoosier, Acadian, Bluegrass, Delta, Dixie, or Yankee, right? That just by saying some of those names, you're probably thinking of various regions, and you will look up, names that of businesses that have those headings, see where they're at, right? And you'll have a chart here of different states, like Hoosier. The Hoosier state is Indiana, right? So logic would have it, most of any business that has that, that name in its title will probably, fall under in the Indiana blank, right? I want you to check that out. You can, you know, giving you a map too. I'll attach a map to that to see if it, a visual for you to see, let it gel with your perceptions, right? Your visual perceptions of the regions described by the term. Okay, so you can read more about the, not too much more. I probably included half of the instructions right there, but so you can check that out once you download that. Friday through Sunday, we got the DQs. Monday, there's going to be no quiz, right? You have, your reading days coming up here, and you have the final, my final, on Thursday. You'll have all day to take the final. Monday, you have no quiz for me. I'm going to cut you a break there. But I want you to know um, the following from chapter 14 for the final. What regions have in common, the difference between a formal and functional region. I want you to answer the question if regions are man-made constructs or if they're just natural things that are there in the landscape. The relationship between a region and sameness and the place of criteria in classifying a region. Again, you have your item sheets by now. I'm sure you have all looked at those. So include the chapter 14 items on in your item sheets. And if you have any questions this week about anything, you guys know how to get a hold of me. I'll be around. And so in the meantime, you guys have a fantastic week here, and next week, all the best in studying. If you're interested in further studies of geography with me, and you have another gen ed to have to pick up, social studies, social science class, I will be doing world regional geography in the fall, where we will be getting into specific um, 7, 8 regions of the globe. Okay, Europe, Australia, Sub-Saharan Africa, right? You name it, we go there. So it's been I just love teaching this course, and hopefully cross paths with you folks again. So have a great week, and do well on all your finals. Bye.